Hey guys, Mr. Mulaney here. So since half the school is at district music competitions, go guys. Um, Gonna record a quick lesson here for everyone who's gone. I have also made skeleton notes I'll be passing out in class. I'll throw these into an email and in a dashboard so you can follow along at home if you print these off. Hopefully you've read Matthew 23 through 25 before you start this, otherwise you're going to be very confused indeed. And your homework for Monday is to read articles 73 and 74 in the Jesus Christ textbook. That's pages 229 through 235. Hopefully I'll have a quiz ready for you on Monday. And then we can talk about some cool end of the world type stuff in greater detail. So we'll get started with the final discourse. So remember, Jesus is giving, throughout the Gospel of Matthew, a couple of times he stops and just gives long teachings. Those are known as discourses. This is the last time he gives one. He's in Jerusalem. Palm Sunday's already happened. This is Holy Week, so to speak. He's about to die in a couple days here. And gets into some heavy stuff. So in Matthew 23, he goes on this long tirade against the scribes and the Pharisees, hypocrites. And interestingly, he starts off with like, hey, everyone should follow what they do because they have authority. Just don't follow their example. Here's everything that's wrong with their example. And it's called the Anti-Beatitudes. And just like in Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, in his first discourse, Jesus gives this initial list of things that lead to blessedness, aka happiness. Jesus is now going on the flip side of that coin. Here are all the things that will mess you up, mess others up, lead to a deeply unhappy life. And it's some hot fire that he's spitting out there. One of the ones that's really interesting to me is like tying up heavy burdens and not lifting a finger to help carry them. Or rereading it this afternoon, one that really struck me was, woe to you, you say, oh, if we lived in the time of our ancestors, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. Because the prophets in the Old Testament, the tradition was that they were all persecuted to death by the Israelites. And so Jesus says, woe to you who say, if we had lived in the time of our ancestors, we would not have killed the prophets and built monuments to the prophets. And thus you show that you are truly the ancestors of those who murdered them. I think that's really interesting in today's culture where it's like we're so we rush to take history out of context and ignore major historical figures for their achievements, ignore their achievements and just focus on he was a racist. We can't ever support him. If we had lived back then, we would have called him out on it. And Jesus is like, well, be a little humble here. That will undermine your blessedness if you take yourself so seriously that you would think that you'd be the best of a previous age. So, just some great stuff to pray with, and especially as you're preparing for confession, Anti-Beatitudes are a good thing to turn to. Then the end of the world. Chapter 24, they're in Jerusalem. If you didn't know, Jerusalem has the temple. The temple would have been one of the ancient wonders of the world. It was truly magnificent. And let me get the page here. Jesus left the temple area, was going away when his disciples approached him to point out the temple buildings. You can imagine them being like, man, Jesus, isn't this great? Isn't this one of the wonders of the world? He said to them in reply, you see all these things, do you not? Amen, I say to you, there will not be left here a stone upon another stone that will not be thrown down. And then the implication is he just walks away. Buzzkill Jesus. Just leaving that to hang there. And he goes to the Mount of Olives. So they approach him privately and said, tell us, when will this happen and what sign will there be of your coming and of the end of the age? It's really key that you see that there are two separate questions here, or two and a half even. Because a lot of people will read this next passage, like Jesus' answer, and think it's all this one answer to one question of like, when will the world end? And it's not. So, yeah, the questions, when will this happen? What sign will there be of your coming and of the end of the age? So, when will the temple be destroyed? When will this happen? When will one stone upon another not be left that will not be thrown down? And then also, when are you going to come again? When will the end of the world, end of this age happen? You're coming. And actually, it's not really come again that they're asking, because they just figured he was going to usher in the end of the world when he came into his kingdom. They weren't expecting the passion. So, when will you come again? When will the world end? Jesus' answer is very confusing to read just straight through, especially if you don't realize he's answering different questions. So he says, Jesus said to them in reply, "See that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will deceive many. You will hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for these things must happen. It won't be the end. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and earthquakes from place to place. All these are the beginning of the labor pains. They'll hand you over to persecution. They will kill you. You'll be hated by all nations because of my name. Many will be led into sin. They will betray and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And because of the increase of evil doing, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who perseveres to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the world as a witness to all nations. Then the end will come." So basically, think of every bad thing that you can think of. Jesus is saying all that's going to happen. And yeah, that's not really having to do with the end. It's not a good predictor thing to be like, there have been 17 wars since Jesus has come, and now there are famines breaking out and earthquakes, 2 earthquakes in a row from place to place. It's like, no. Jesus is saying, everything that you are tempted to think is meaningful when it comes to bad stuff, like this has got to be the end, it's not the end. So yeah, it's a nice dose of reality. Then Jesus continues, "When you see the desolating abomination spoken of through Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains." The desolating abomination spoken of through Daniel the prophet. That would be like what Daniel describes as like this terrible empire coming in and destroying everything. The holy place is the temple. So when you see the Romans come, run. Just run. A person on the housetop must not go down to get things out of his house. He should run. A person in the field must not return to get his cloak, because he needs to run. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days, because they'll have to run. Pray that your flight not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for you gotta run. For at that time there will be a great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until now, nor will ever be. And if those days had not been shortened, no one would be saved, but for the sake of the elect they will be shortened. So the Romans, when they come, it's going to be the worst. The temple will be destroyed. Like, no such thing has happened since then, and yeah, nothing worse had happened up to that point. It was just awful. Like, this happened in the year 70 AD. There was a rebellion that the Judeans were rising against the Roman Empire. Remember, the Roman Empire only had 2 rules, right? Pay taxes, don't rebel. They broke the second rule. And so the Romans came in, and they were utterly merciless. Destroyed the temple. To this day, it's in ruins. All that's left is one wall, the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall. So when you see like pictures of people in Jerusalem like crying against a wall, that's one of the walls that belong to the temple. So Jesus is saying, just run. Run, don't be a hero. It'll be awful. Run. And he says, even then, you're going to be tempted to think this is the end. But if anyone says to you then, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. False messiahs, false prophets will arise. They will perform signs and wonders so great as to deceive, if that were possible, even the elect. Behold, I'm telling to you now. If they say to you, he, or the Messiah, is in the desert, don't go out there. It's not me. If they say, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe it. It's not me. For just as lightning comes from the east and is seen as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. So Jesus is saying, temple will be destroyed. I'm not going to come at that moment. Don't worry. But when I do come, you'll definitely know when it's happening. He says, for just as lightning comes from the east and is seen as far as the west. It doesn't matter where you are. Like, you'll be inside the house, in a room, next to a room with windows. You'll notice that lightning strikes across a sky. You'll hear it, right? Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures would gather. Like, you might not be able to smell a corpse or see a corpse, but if you look into the sky, you see the vultures circling above, you know that there is a corpse there. He continues, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming upon the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he will send out his angels with a trumpet blast, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. So, you'll definitely know when it's happening. Some people freak out, like, what if the end of the world, what if Jesus has already come and we just didn't know it? No, like, that would go against what Jesus promised. You'll definitely know when the end of the world is happening. You definitely know when Jesus is coming again. Yeah, it's what's known as, in Greek, the parousia. Parousia. This is a word that was used in Greek to describe when an emperor would make an official visit, and it would be this big deal, huge parade of, the whole entourage and all this impressive stuff that is in the wake of the emperor or leading up to the emperor. Jesus uses this word in the original Greek to describe his coming. It's the closest analog or the closest description that I think we'll all get is in Aladdin, the whole Prince Ali, Mighty is He, Ali Baba scene where he makes his grand entrance as a prince. I know this is not the first time that I've used Aladdin. It's very useful. It's going to be like that, right? Like, they're in the original, or in the movie, like, if you check out the scene leading up to it, the thing that kicks it off is a trumpet blast. And people look up from their work, and what's going on? Everyone's attention is gathered. Jesus says he will send out his angels with a trumpet blast. They will gather his elect from the four winds. So an emperor, when he was coming to visit, would send out a trumpet blast, gather all the important dignitaries and rulers of the area, like, hey, emperor's coming for his visit. Better gather. Jesus will send out his angels, right? And from one end of the heavens to the other, from one, in the earthly parousia, the emperor would go from one end of a kingdom to another to gather all the people that needed to be gathered so that everyone could see it. It was this huge spectacle. Jesus is saying the same thing. Instead of an elephant, he's going to be riding on heaven itself, the clouds of heaven. Instead of symbols of power, it will be like he will have power and great glory. Yeah, I think this is what gets me when people, especially it was a couple years ago, like, the apocalypse is coming, like, end of the world is nigh, and like all those different predictions, like 2013, 2012, and then it happened at the millennium, year 2000. Like, people spent actual money, like, preparing for the end of the world with billboards and stuff. Like, it's coming. And how is it that they arrived at these dates? They did some weird, like, symbolic interpretation of world events in light of the gospel and Jesus' prediction. What annoys me about it is they leave off the part of the prediction where Jesus says, no one knows when this will happen. He says in verse 36, of that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Hopefully, you're thinking, wait, Jesus is God, he is one substance with the Father. How is it possible that the Father can know something and the Son doesn't? It's weird, right? The answer is in the letter to Philippians. It says that Jesus emptied himself when he took on human nature. And so, even though he still is fully God, it seems like he emptied himself of certain divine powers. One of the things that he hid from himself was the knowledge of the end times, when the Son of Man will come again. And so, if Jesus doesn't know, though, certainly we're not going to be able to figure it out by taking a weird decoder ring to the Bible. So, don't fall for it as you grow up and people try and trick you about the end of the world being on such and such a date. It's just not gospel. So we'll pick it up from there. I know we didn't talk much about chapter 25, those great parables. The reading from the textbook is about the Christian understanding of death, and we'll talk about heaven, hell, and purgatory, judgment on Monday. So buckle up. Have a good weekend, those of you who are gone.